That is awesome.
Go get one of them big old police
Brett.
winter coats, put it in the room.
We're
turn it on
going.
for 6 minutes,
Brett.
and then come bring it to her. He'll be warm. Sorry, sir.
Let's wrap this up.
No, for sure. There's a giant jacket in there that
Okay.
won't fit me, but it'll wrap around
I
my
would
butt.
like to welcome everybody out to our City Council General Meeting for May 27th, 2020. We will start with a Pledge of Allegiance. We have asked our newly appointed City Attorney if he would lead that for us. So if you would please come to the pulpit and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Item 4.2, City Council comments and recognitions. Okay.
But just want to speak about something that was announced during our work meeting about the Wheels on Meals. Meals on
The
Wheels.
Wheels on Meals. Okay.
That's a new program. I'd like to be involved.
Never mind. Just made a
Everybody
mess.
gets a car with their lunch.
Meals on Wheels. When he announced in our work meeting a program that we're going to be a, what's the correct term? Transfer station for 11 seniors here in the city, homebound, and being able to provide them meals, I think, is just awesome. So I'm really excited we get to do that. Thanks for all the work in doing that. So great job.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I'd also like to just take a moment to appreciate the efforts our staff is going to ensure our health and safety. I was impressed with not only the fact that we have things set up for social distancing downstairs, but that we have awesome Yeti stickers to show people where to stand. So genuinely impressed. You guys have done a great job, and I appreciate the efforts that all of our staff, from the health and safety to just each individual member, putting together to make sure that not only the people that work at the city, but all of our residents remain safe and healthy as well. So thank you very much. With that, we will move on to the public comment portion of our meeting. Audience members may bring any item.
We're going to skip 4.2 there.
Yes, we absolutely are.
I guess we did.
That's what we
Sorry,
were doing.
I skipped that. My apologies.
I was like, what?
Steve's a little rusty with this whole meeting thing.
I mean,
right
you haven't
now.
been here in a while.
We'll get there.
Audience members may bring any item to the city council's attention. Comments will be limited to 2 minutes. State law prohibits the council from acting on items that do not appear on the agenda. Public comment for this meeting may also be conducted electronically. Any person interested in addressing the city council electronically may submit a comment by emailing recorder@herriman.org or by visiting herriman.org/agendas and minutes, where there will be a link to join the meeting electronically to submit a comment. Your statement will be read into the public record. So with that, I will go ahead and open the public comment portion of our meeting. Okay, saying none, I'll look to our recorder to see if we have any electronic participation. All right, with that, we will close the public comment portion of our meeting for tonight. Item 6, which is city council boards and committee reports.
So I got a report from the Regional Growth Committee. Had a meeting last week. It was crazy, the numbers they were talking about, the impact that COVID has had economically for the city. They're saying that they have had increases in certain aspects and substantial decreases in certain things. I just wanted to highlight a couple of those. They have seen a 40% growth in e-commerce. They have seen a 40% growth in telecommuting. They're estimating approximately 100% increase in bicycle use. Approximately a 100% increase in open space use. So this kind of goes along with, I think, what most of us would expect, right? People are staying home, telecommuting, buying stuff online, going out to the parks and recreating because everything else is closed, trying to get some fresh air. So we knew all this stuff. Some good things they said, though, is there is a 70% decrease in public transit use, a 40% decrease in freeway volumes, and a 38% decrease in air emissions. So we've seen really positive impacts in traffic flow, air quality issues are all great. They just don't know that that's going to hold. So they had some projections about some of the long-term when we get back to whatever the new normal will be. And they were predicting that e-commerce would still be 10 to 20% above what it was before. Telecommuting, again, 10 to 20%. Bicycles, maybe 10 to 30%. Open space, 10 to 30%. Some things that they did seem to think, though, is that transit will continue to be down somewhere between 10 to maybe 30% down on a go-forward basis. I think that's a really positive step, especially when we talk about some of the traffic congestion and issues that are out there. Seeing something like that, kind of a number projected, I think is a positive for
So you're
all of
talking
us.
like cars on the road?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, volume, just total freeway volume, down 20% to maybe unchanged, right? So it could stay the same, maybe as low as 20% reduction. One of the things they said, I think this is really important to Herriman residents, is transit time by car, where we know Herrimanites have the longest transit time of any city. They said we should expect maybe a 10 to 15% reduction in travel time on a go-forward basis. Great news, very positive things, I think, for all of us, right? There were a couple other things they talked about, some highlighted projects that they talked about that I think are relevant to us, mostly focused on U111. They're going to be having connectivity to 70th South, 74th South, 8600 South, and West Jordan, bringing those all the way out to U111. And then they're also prioritizing the rerouting of 7300 West to come down to 126 South. It's kind of moving 111 over to 7300 West. We've known this is coming for a while, but seeing that now made priorities in the regional transportation plan, which is kind of the first step that it has to do before it can actually happen. We know there's some activity happening out to our western border, and anything that can be done to help improve the infrastructure, improve connectivity, get traffic flowing out of here, reducing travel times, I think are positive notes, at least positive messages for our citizens to hear. Anyway, that's all I got for that meeting, but that was fabulous information, I think, all across the board.
I've got the last 2 weeks have been busy for myself, and I appreciate the report that Steve gave on regional growth because it actually was kind of a broad look at several of the meetings that I attended and the information that was provided there. So I'll try and be brief. From COM, so Council of Mayors, and COG, both of those meetings I've attended the past couple weeks, and really the discussion in both of those meetings really focused on the individual effects that are hitting each of our communities and how the pandemic has affected us in different ways depending on, obviously, our location. From the towns of Alta and Brighton, who've suffered a tremendous economic hit because of the pandemic and the ski season being closed down, and then the last couple of months of no tourism up in their areas. They have significant challenges that they're faced with in their current budgets to make up the shortfall in revenues. All the way down to obviously the valleys from the east side to the west side, and how this has affected everybody really on an individual basis, again, depending on the commercial base in their areas, the construction in their areas, the traffic, all of those things. And so it was really just kind of an open dialogue and discussion of each community, the challenges they're facing, and what each community really is doing to try and deal with those challenges they're being faced. So it was really just a good open discussion, again, really mainly focused on the current pandemic that we've been dealing with. Transcom, really focused again on the transportation and a lot of the things that were shared just there by Steve from the regional growth as we had that report from the regional growth committee and Mayor Ramsey that was given in Transcom. So I won't recount the things that Steve just shared with us. I did have the UTA advisory board meeting just today. And I will, again, just kind of comment on some of the things that Steve just shared in terms of what UTA's had to do in terms of dealing, again, with the effects of the pandemic and the significant decrease in ridership. And they went through all modes of ridership and gave their percentages down, but basically they're dealing with anywhere from about a 60 to 85% decrease in ridership, depending on which mode of transportation you're talking about, with the biggest hits being to Front Runner and to tracks themselves. So there's obviously been service modifications as a result to try and deal with that, with most of those modifications being increases in time and in their frequency. So Front Runner going from 15 to 30-minute intervals, tracks. Front Runner going from 30 to 60-minute intervals. And then, of course, changes in their bus route modifications with still trying to provide that service that was out there. But again, they are just now, of course, we've just saw our status change from orange to yellow very recently, so they are just now starting to see a very slight uptick in ridership. But again, they're taking all the necessary precautions. And again, the discussion today was really what we've heard here tonight, and that is we will not get back to where we were. It's going to be the new normal and how we do that moving forward. So they're installing, plexiglass shields around the drivers. That will be a permanent piece of that, of those fixtures now for protection of the drivers. Currently, they are still practicing rear. They've switched a lot of their bus routes out to the buses that have rear boarding options on them, and they've put again another barrier with some tape up front that doesn't allow any front boarding again for that distancing. Now they anticipate that changing again as restrictions lift, and that's why they're moving again to these enclosures around the drivers to help protect them. But again, it will be the new normal moving forward as those riderships continue to come up. Certainly that has impacted the anticipated revenues, and so the executive team over there is making adjustments in current capital projects in terms to deal with their revenue shortfall, recognizing that a big chunk of their revenue that they count on comes from grants and those types of things that are tied to certain projects. So it's certainly a balancing act. But they have conducted a recent survey, which was right before the pandemic hit, that was really just a what's the right word I'm looking for? A community survey about the service. And everything that's come back from, again, the challenges we know UTA have had is over the past to very positive input and remarks that has come back in customer service and the image of UTA over the last couple of years. So we think that they're certainly working in the right direction, and there's still work to be done. Again, now the focus will be on getting us back to where ridership increases and we get those frequencies back to where they were before in the ridership that we're seeing. But again, generally, if you took across the board decreases as a system as a whole, you'd be about a 65% decrease in ridership during the pandemic. So significant for sure. And then lastly, I will just sewer board meeting, which was held recently. Really, two main things that came out of that. One being that, strangely enough, with everybody staying home, they've seen an increase in flows to the sewer treatment facility. And they've actually had to divert some of that. They've been running at capacity at the facility, so they've had to divert some of that to Jordan Basin. But again, the effects of the pandemic and like I say, fewer cars on the road, but more people at home, which means more water, more flushing of toilets, more showers, all of those things that increases. So there's always a reciprocal effect in one direction or another based on the pandemic that we're dealing with. And then the last thing, if you've noticed as you've been driving down Bangor Highway, the second maintenance building even though it's quite behind schedule, is due for completion at the end of this month there. So they will be permanently vacating the building that they've owned in Draper for years. They actually sold it a little over a year ago and have been leasing it back until the completion of this building, but they will be permanently vacating and consolidating everything to that property there in the river bottoms at the end of May. So that's a report, I think, from all of them. And then I have Wasatch Front Regional Council, which is tomorrow, so I'll be reporting on that on our next council meeting.
So at the water board, and again, just like you said, more people are staying home, and so there's an uptick even in residential water use. We also had an extremely dry April, which led into exactly what we're talking about with the fire situation, with the fireworks. It obviously impacts the water that we use. So again, just try to reiterate to people to be water wise with your lawns, your yards. Those type of things really drastically increase right now, and people had to start watering quite a bit earlier this year, way earlier this year than last year. But just be wise about that. They offer their local scape classes. You can go online and look at that type of stuff. They're not having the face-to-face classes right now, but there's a lot of resources online to try and make your yard more water wise, and just be better stewards of that resource. And then the garbage districts, we're just finished up the collection, can't think of the word now, the collection that we have for outdoor collection and stuff in Magna. That was successful there. Herriman's turn, I don't believe, is until close to September, but you'll receive a postcard in the mail that will allow you to sign up and reserve a dumpster. And then what they hope is that people will share dumpsters with their neighbors. And it actually worked really well. We didn't have near the problems with trash being left on the side of the dumpsters and things like that we do when they're just parked on the street. So
Sherry, can you confirm? I think they said the cost of those is only going to be like $80.
it's part of, you can rent a dumpster now for that, but this is part of the services. So there is no fee during our week.
During that September week.
During
Okay,
the time
got it.
it's a Herriman's turn, there is no fee for that. You have to reserve them. You have to get online and reserve that, but there is no fee. It's part of the services that are offered during the Herriman's week. But other than that, you can rent dumpsters for them for a discount.
Yeah, the $80 seems like a really great idea if you can get together with a few neighbors and get one in there. It seems
Yeah.
like a good solution, so.
Yeah, exactly. So, but during that time when it's Herriman's time, there is no fee for that.
Awesome.
What's that?
Sherry, quick question, and I'm not sure, and maybe Wendy, you'll know. I know recently there's been some social media posting about the Flip Your Strip program that's out there. Is that through the water district?
Yep.
So actually a question that I have is, there are a few areas in the city that, and my street being one of them, that we actually don't have a park strip. We have no sidewalk. It's kind of that rural cross section there. The question is do you know, is it specifically, if you were to do something with your frontage right there along the street, even though it's not technically a park strip, do you know if that would still qualify under the Flip Your Strip program, where you're still trying to reduce your your grass footprint and become more water wise? Do you have any idea whether that would fall in line or not with that Flip Your Strip program?
I don't, but just if you look on their website, there's some good information about the Flip Your Strip. I would think so. I think they try to encourage anything possible to minimize, I don't want to say waste, but there's just better ways to do those types of properties where you don't get the beneficial use out of just a grass. So I would think that there is probably something on there, but check on their website and there would be some information on the Flip Your Strip.
As you mentioned, Mother Nature made us turn on our sprinklers earlier than normal this year, and now is the point where I'm dreading each and every water bill that comes.
Yeah, for sure. And so much of that isn't the real impact of it. We're subsidized so much on water that we don't truly pay the full cost of it, and it still hurts.
It still hurts, yep. Thank you.
Councilman Henderson, do you have anything you'd like to add? Okay, thank you. Okay, with that, we will move on to the next portion of our meeting. We do not have any reports, presentations, or appointments, so we will be skipping item 7. And we'll move on straight to item 8, public hearing to discuss the tentative fiscal year 2020, 2021 Herriman City budget and to amend the fiscal year 2019-2020 Herriman City budget. Alan Ray.
Thank you. To add to what's been said already, our May sales tax distribution was considerably higher than even the State Tax Commission had estimated. We were distributed $598,000 in May, which was for March sales. That's up 29% over last May, and we're still 21% up for year-to-date, which we had budgeted 15% increase. We're at 21 right now. Again, in June is when they do the population adjustments, so we ought to see another boost in May. So, you know, we'll watch it close and see, but our sales tax, which is a larger number in our budget, is staying stronger than expected.
Alan, when will we know about the April numbers?
Well, we won't they'll give us an estimate in about 7 to 10 days of what they think it'll be. Their last estimate was about 15% short. So we ought to have some idea in the first 10 days. By the 20th, we should actually know the actual number. But so far, and a lot of the things that have been said here are being seen in our sales tax right now. Fast food is up, liquor's up, e-commerce is up.
Both together?
Grocery stores, even though our grocery stores are always in our top 1 or 2, 3, they're higher than normal for this. But this actually, our May distribution is our second largest ever sales tax distribution. February of this year, which is the Christmas sales, is the only one we've ever had higher than what we had in May. So it was a nice surprise. The tax commission's estimate was 520. We had 598. So sales tax have been strong. We're seeing strength in our franchise taxes. They're up about 15% as well. We budgeted those to be up 7%. You know, we're just seeing now our building permits are down some, but they're not down much beyond what we expected. We had already budgeted to be down this year in building permits, and as our committee met back in before this all hit, we sat and reduced them yet again. And so we're not going to be too far off in our building permits if they continue to go the way we're seeing right now. So our major things, we've seen them staying in line with what we've projected. So we feel pretty comfortable with the budget as it stands. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Hey, Alan, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. I did have a resident reach out to me just questioning on the budget about there was a budget item that they were asking for an increase and they hadn't, because they had to cancel some different things, that they weren't going to use up their full budget this year. And he was like, well, what will happen? Why are they asking for an increase when they're not even going to use up this year? I know the answer, but would you explain that just so that
Well,
it's
first
on
of
the
all,
record?
we are running right now in the current year a huge underspend. We're underspending in our budget way below the budget. We expect to have a significant surplus at the end of this year. Now,
Can I make a comment to that, Alan?
yeah,
We're doing that with our managing directors by design,
Intentionally, yeah.
so that we don't end up in a problem. We want to take that money and roll it over into capital projects, so we have an extra layer of protection, which we talked about earlier.
you know, it comes down to, you know, we're being cautious, we're not scared. Things are going very well. But we are going to have a big underspend, and we're looking to have that. Now, as Brett mentioned earlier, we maintain our full allowable fund balance every year. You know, we're right on the verge of being too much every year. So we have all of the security as far as fund balance that our state legislature will allow us to have. And so we go as close to that fund balance as we're allowed to do, and the rest of it gets transferred into our capital projects fund for future projects. However, right now, that's going to recoup the land cost in the auto mall, but that's where that's at, and that'll change what that is. But, you know, we don't see our management going out and saying, okay, we've got this, we've got to spend it or else. We don't see that. And you know, you've got to look at, like with the events that Wendy's talking about, there's a substantial revenue that comes along with those events. So if we don't have them, it's the whole expense doesn't go away, because you also lose the revenue that goes with it. So it's offset in a lot of different ways. But, you know, right now we have what appears to be a very substantial underspend, which will go into creating more fund balance in our capital projects, and it will maintain all of our legal fund balance in our general fund.
Thank you.
Alan, I know at one point the state legislature was at least contemplating doing a temporary change to the maximal allowable on the fund balance. Did that happen or not? Where
No,
they
it
changed
has
that?
not. And it's kind of odd, and, you know, it would be, I would be curious to see the rationale that goes into the decision, but cities can only have 25% of fund balance in the general fund, but say a special district like UFA can have 75%.
Right.
The sewer district, all of the districts can go to 75% of their fund balance, but they limit cities to 25%. It would be nice if we could have some leeway in that. You know, it's hard for us, we do it, but it's hard for us to stay at 25%, because when our budget's going up at the rate we are because of our growth, the percentage goes up as well, because our budget's going up with greater demands and greater numbers, so the percentage goes up, and we've been maintaining that as close as we can to our maximum. So, and our one option besides keeping it in our general fund is moving it to our capital projects and designating it for future use. So,
Yeah, you're right. It will be interesting to see if there's any discussion generated around this where people are having to potentially dip into their, you know, their 25% or their rainy day fund.
yeah.
And realizing that at 25%, a lot of times that doesn't carry you very far.
The legislature also voted not to extend our date for our budget.
Right.
However, they extended theirs, but, you know, they voted not to extend ours. So,
Yep.
okay.
Thanks, Alan.
All right, any questions, other questions from the council members? Okay, with that, we will go ahead and open up this public hearing. If you would like to speak, please come to the podium at this time. Seeing none, I'll look to our recorder, see if we have any electronic. Okay, with that, I will accept a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, any additional questions or concerns by the council?
Just another big thank you to finance and our staff for their fiscal responsibility. Again, for our finance director to be able to stand up here, again, really at this particular time, given the situations that we faced, and really to be able to stand there and say with confidence that we're in a good position, that's pretty remarkable right now. Again, knowing some of the struggles that some of the communities very close to us are experiencing, and again, that's not just by accident. So,
Okay, we will move on to item 9. which is our consent agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda as written.
I will second.
I have a motion and a second. Sherry?
Yes.
Clint?
Yes.
Jared? Steve?
Yes.
And I vote yes, that motion passes. Item 10 is a discussion, and 10.1 is a discussion and consideration of a resolution adopting and approving a public improvement district policy. Alan Ray.
Really don't have anything to present here, except that, you know, we've been looking at this for a while now. I think the council has had all of their questions answered. This would create a public infrastructure district that would allow a certain area, if it were to be created by the city, to assess taxes for infrastructure. And so if there's any questions, I'd be glad to try and answer them. Other than that, I guess it's for your discussion.
Awesome. I'm actually going to look at our new city attorney who provided us a white paper on this item. Can you just briefly give us your rundown of the different options that we've been discussing and then what your legal opinion would be on our course of action?
Absolutely. So you've all seen the policy that Alan has drafted, and I have to give him the credit on that. He did all of the legwork, and it's my legal opinion that he nailed it. I mean, the Public Infrastructure District Act grants a lot of discretion to the city to come up with their own policies, to set forth a procedure that applicants can follow when they're proposing a public infrastructure district within the city. And the policy that Alan's drafted allows the city to exercise all of that discretion and allows applicants to understand the process that they have to go through. Again, the act provides you as the city council ultimate discretion to approve or deny a public infrastructure district. It grants a lot of latitude to set forth the conditions within a policy that you might adopt. It does not require that you do adopt one, but it's my legal opinion that having a policy allows the city to whittle away potentially bad applications or ones that they might not even consider and would save those applicants significant time and money in just submitting an application that's never going to get approved. So again, all the discretion is yours to approve an application. Having a policy doesn't hurt, but you don't have to have one. So your options technically are we just continue forward with the parameters that the state legislature has put into the act. We can adopt our own policy that kind of sets forth the parameters under which we'll consider an application for approval, or we can just come out and say, you know what, public infrastructure districts are not our thing for Herriman City. We're not even going to consider applications.
But your recommendation is if we are going to ever consider them, that we put a policy in place, correct?
Correct. And the reason why, again, is because you as a city council do not have to approve one. So even because we have a policy, our policy does not state we're obligated to approve anything that comes across. But we are willing to have a discussion based upon certain conditions and parameters that are set forth in our policy.
Okay. Thank you.
Here's a question got raised last time, and I'm not sure that I have a great answer personally, but I'd like you to speak to this because I think you addressed it in your letter. There's concern that this is for lack of a better term, a bit of a pet project for members of our state legislature. They're very much in favor of these PIDs. There's a lot of reasons for that, but we won't go into that. And there's a concern that should we adopt a policy or start moving down this road, that the state legislature could move the goalposts on us and change us and make it much more favorable for them and less favorable for the city, undermining the policy that we put in place. What concerns do you have about that possibility, and what would be our course of action should something like that happen?
Well, the way that the act is currently drafted, again, it gives the city 100% absolute discretion in approving that. You know, if the act were to be amended, there would be an opportunity for the city to likely implement its own policy to address those changes. You know, an amendment to the legislation isn't going to be effective immediately. We're going to have some time to adjust. But my opinion is, based upon the current language of the act, the legislature, even though this may or may not be their pet project, they've still given the city council absolute discretion to exercise whatever policy they think is appropriate for their jurisdiction.
Does it also grant the city the ability to repeal a policy completely?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and in fact, I did add 1 or 2 lines to Alan's policy that he had drafted, essentially just informing applicants that we can change anything at any time. We can repeal this policy. We can, essentially pull the rug out on a potential applicant, and that's not what we're trying to do. We're not trying to make it difficult, but that policy is in line with the statutory language of the act.
I guess that's part of the problem I have with the whole thing. It's like, we're just gonna have a policy that we don't even have to follow policy. You know what I mean? It's like, it just makes no sense to even have it. In my vision, it's like, come in and then all the rules change anyway.
Sure.
So this guiding document, this guideline, you can follow it or not.
And that's a decision you can make, and that's also some additional instruction that you can provide staff in creating a policy is, do we want to narrow down the scope of the parameters that the city is willing to consider in making that policy? But also, yeah, I mean, you can provide any additional information you want in that policy. And that may be one of the reasons that the legislature gave the city absolute discretion in doing that. But as Councilmember Shields mentioned, that could always be amended and changed.
I just think it's really strange legislation in the first place. My biggest hang up on it is the constitutionality of it. And I know that they've had people look at it, but again, I'm just still hung up on the taxation without representation. It's like, you can have a whole board that's never been elected that can have authority to tax you.
Right. And that is part of the district act, right? I mean, that is one of the issues that a lot of people have with that. And it's something that can be addressed in the policy, but
Yeah,
also.
and Alan's done a good job of that.
Right. He has done a great job of that. And also, that's something that can be addressed in the governing document. That's part of the legislation that's built into the act, is that the application is formalized by what's called a governing document, and that is approved by council. And council has significant leverage to include parameters within that, provisions within that, that would allow certain governance, certain taxation rates, things like that, that would maybe address some of those concerns.
I'm going to ask one other question, and you can slap my hands if I'm getting on thin ice here. So one of the things about the PID is that a city is not necessarily involved after the initial setup. There comes a time where the city doesn't have, there's no elected officials representing anybody on that board. A couple of ideas that were presented is the idea that the city would retain a small portion of a land ownership inside a PID, where it would allow the city to retain representation on that board. Or, and this is the question I'm asking, is there a way in those governing documents to require a representative of the city to be involved in those boards? Can we supersede the legislation in that way?
I think that's a great question, and I think the jury's probably still out on that. I think it's something that you could take out for a spin, and you might get pushback from the applicant. But again, it's the governing document is that the sole approve. The city council has discretion to approve or deny that. If that's something that's going to be a deal breaker, that's obviously something that would just not be enough to get it over the edge for city council. But in my legal opinion, I don't see why you couldn't include that as a requirement. The potential board could approve that and say, yeah, let's absolutely have someone on there. And in the case of the one that's been proposed by the city, because the city is a property owner within that that area, under the statute, they would have the right to sit on that board.
So I'm going to.
That's kind of more of a general question than specific,
Right.
but I think there's a fear that this is the opening of Pandora's box where it comes to PIDs, right? I think that we've beaten these up pretty hard in meetings and expressed some skepticism over the idea behind it, whether or not they really work, some of the potential negative impacts of it. I don't know that we've had a completely fair discussion about what the potential positives are, how it could be used to work. Some of the things that have been set up to I guess, alleviate some of the concerns. We haven't necessarily gone down that discussion. Maybe we could do that a little bit tonight if we want to, but I just want to make sure I'm asking the right questions to say, if we open this box, can we close it? If we open this box, are we getting ourselves out over our skis and getting in trouble here? Or is this something that we have the ability to go, you know, this just really isn't going to work for us. We're not happy with it and can shut that back down. So, and I hate, to Sherry's point, making a policy that we can just, okay, we don't like that policy anymore. It's kind of a strange way to do it, but I still like the ability to have that protection should we change our minds.
And maybe to answer your question, I think when I read between the lines of the legislation, I see one of the benefits as being we have ultimate discretion, but we're also open to potentially good ideas that support reasonable development within the city. And in my opinion, that's what a policy enables you to do, is to say we're open to having conversations with developers, with potential applicants, and creating a public infrastructure district that would be beneficial for the city. Right. And that you can, again, narrow the scope of that to whatever you want that to be. But it also leaves open the opportunity to have that discussion.
I think one of the positives that was described to me was, say, for instance, if you're just some guy that owns 40 acres of land and, you know, you're not a developer, you can't afford to develop it, but you're thinking, oh, I'd like to just develop this. A PID enables just that person who doesn't have access to those types of resources to develop his own land and his own property without because they wouldn't have the same credentials to bond. I mean, they just wouldn't be able to come up with the cash that is, you know, necessary to develop. And so that was kind of maybe some of the thought behind it, was it will allow just, you know, more private property owners just that aren't developers to just come in and do something with their property without having a whole bunch of upfront costs.
Yeah,
And I think that along those lines, I think one of the other potential benefits, again, this is all brand new, right? But I think one of the potential benefits, and this is kind of, I'll be honest with you, a little bit of the opposite of what you said, Steve, but as I've done some of my research and had a few conversations on this, one of the things that was kind of explained to me as a potential positive really goes in line with what you just said, Sherry, and that is that it removes the city from being in the middle of that. You know, we've had multiple discussions as a council about CDA, CRAs, and, you know, the reimbursement agreements and those types of things that the city is squarely in the middle of all the time. And this process really allows potential landowners to go out and have a mechanism, just as Sherry said, to fund those infrastructure improvements without the city having to be involved all in that process and have to set up, you know, reimbursement mechanisms to pay that back, which honestly, for me, there's a lot of potential positives to not being in that.
right.
So to your point of, do we want to do
issue, right?
Right.
And it eliminates that, right? It just
so
goes
to
straight
your
back.
point of, do we want to make a governing document that makes us stay on there? Again, I think that's something we need to really vet out, because I think that there's a potential where we say, this gives us to say, this has nothing to do with this. Now, to Sherry's point about, obviously, you know, taxation without representation, I get her point there. I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. I don't have those same concerns there. But again, I think anything that we can do that allows good development to move forward without it having to be somehow financed or have the city's backing to do it, that's a positive for the city to not be tied into that. And so, and I know I've expressed this opinion last time we talked about it, but I'll just express it again, you know, whether to put a policy in place or not. It's an option that's out there. I mean, we can adopt a policy that says we're not going to entertain them, obviously. I don't particularly think that that's the prudent thing or the right thing to do either, because it is so new, and there may be something that is very beneficial for us to consider in terms of using a PID to potentially allow that development to move forward. But again, it's been approved. It's been approved up by the legislature. I'm of the opinion that it's much better for us to have a loosely, as has been described to us, drafted policy that that at least allows us to consider it. Again, I don't like the fact that we potentially have a policy that we can say, well, we're not going to follow it on this, but at least it starts to put some parameters in place of where an applicant may know at least where our head is at when considering a PID. And then as we move down the road, again, as our attorney has mentioned, I think that really the key to all of it is the governing document and how we structure that governing document to allow something to potentially move forward. And that's where we would really need to,
And Glenn,
to focus.
I think you're making a good point here. There's, the way that this policy is written is it only applies to one
Yep.
thing. We know that there's an applicant who's desirous to make this a part of their development. They have a plan on how this will help facilitate some of the things they want to do. I think they still need to make that case to us, right? But the policy allows them a mechanism to make that case.
Yep.
Does that make sense, to have that discussion? I think we, you know, as this applies to the auto mall, we're all supportive and anxious to see that be successful and go forward. And this may be a means to make that happen. I don't want to frustrate the applicant and the developer here by saying our policy is going to be no policy, because that doesn't give them an opportunity to make the case and move forward and have a conversation and discuss whether or not this really does make sense. So you know, to get to the point, I'm in support of the policy as it's been written as a mechanism to get us into further discussions. I don't necessarily know that we can't have those discussions without a policy per se, but I like that this says, this is how you do it, this is the committee that's going to review it, this is how it's going to be done. I appreciate that structure being put in, so it gives the applicant at least a means to move forward. So that, for what it's worth, that's my comment.
I'm also of the opinion, and our attorney said this, and I think we may have skipped a little bit, but a lot of it's weeding out what we don't want. And that's really probably one of the biggest reasons why I am in support of a policy, is because we've all made it very clear we would not even begin to consider this in residential. This is not something, you know, and that's where I would get into agreement with Sherry of representation or taxation without representation if we were doing this on a residential property. Being that it's commercial property, I don't think, I agree more with Clint that it doesn't necessarily apply, but I think that having this type of a policy helps us define that and helps us make sure that we're weeding out some of those potential applications down the road. That makes it clear that that's something we're just not even going to consider, and don't waste our time. We don't want to waste your time. It's just not going to happen. And so for me, I think it's a good start to just set some very basic boundaries of what we're looking for and how we're looking to have that happen, and then moving forward from there. I am not, you know, I think I'll be with Steve here. I mean, I haven't actually seen an actual proposal for a specific PID yet. So I couldn't speak one way or another to that because I haven't seen it. And there's always things that change and always things that can make difference. Am I absolutely willing to consider it in a commercial area to support infrastructure to get something moving? I'm absolutely willing to consider it. And so I think that I agree there that it's also a mechanism to move things forward and to start that process on something that is new and that we may not, you know, we're not 100% sure of either way yet.
Well, there's fear of the unknown here, right?
Yeah.
And the only way to figure it out is to start at least down the road a little bit to be able to have those discussions, like you said. And
We don't want to be the guinea pig and mess it up, right? I mean, I think that's the biggest fear, is that there's not a lot of precedence for us to look at it in Utah, right? There are some other states that have some things, but the controls over, like in Colorado and Texas, the controls over them are so much less than exist in the state of Utah that they don't even have to record those documents somewhere. You can't even get copies of them. So the fact that we can do it, put it on the title, have it recorded, I mean, there's some good things about our legislation that differs than other states' legislation. But to that point, we don't want to make a mistake that we didn't foresee. We don't want to set something up and then go, man, we should have done this at the beginning. So once the policy's in place, I think there's still a very deliberative, considerate process that we have to go through to really see if that even makes sense, right? I think we all share a lot of the same basic concerns about, I don't know about this and how does it work, But I'd be interested to see what our automobile applicants have up their sleeve, how they think it might work, and get some more details about whether or not so we can start discussing concrete things instead of philosophical ideas. So
And we have a secret weapon in Mr. Andresi, who will no doubt lead us down the right path.
I like to refer to him as the Crusher.
I'm okay with that. Nick.
Okay, good.
That's great.
I just want to make sure that we give Councilman Henderson a chance to chime in here if he'd like. Okay, well, I think you make a fair point, Jared, on that. I think you're right. I think there is a difference, and I can see that concern. I'm not sure that I share the same concern necessarily, because we do have the ability to basically pull back at any point. But I do recognize, and I think that is a legitimate concern, and I'm not going to hold that against anybody for if they have that particular concern. I think that's fair.
Yeah, and I will
Can I ask a
just,
question of Jared? Are you still with us? Okay, I'm gonna ask you this question. So, are you advocating for more of a position that would say, if and when we have a discussion about a PID that we're willing to consider, that we almost simultaneously approve a policy and a PID discussion at the same time? You wouldn't want to do one before the other?
if you are going to allow them have a policy. And by putting a policy in place, it signals that we are going to allow them. And that might be more of a philosophical difference, but that's just my feeling on it where I'm at.
No, I appreciate, I appreciate that view. I guess my view of that is I think having a policy in place doesn't necessarily signal that we're going to allow them. What, to me, it says is it signals that we will at least have a discussion with you about them.
But I think Jared's point is still valid.
It is, absolutely. The other piece that
I
I
don't
was.
know if we've answered
Yeah.
the question, though, the if question. I don't know we've answered that fully
Yeah.
as a council.
But
Are we willing to consider them at all? I think.
I'll speak for myself and say I am, just because,
am I.
again, it's a mechanism that's there. Again, we don't understand it, but the only way to fully understand the potential of what it can accomplish is to consider it and to have those discussions. That's in my view. The second piece to that is, and I appreciate Jared, we don't know what the true timing is of an auto dealership being able and ready to come in there. And agree that I think that that's going to be some time probably down the road. But what I do believe needs to happen in the meantime, and to potentially accelerate that as much as possible, is to have that infrastructure in there and those pads shovel ready. That, I think, is what they're looking for. I think that the potential of, again, having to come in and do all the infrastructure work and all of those things to get it to where it's buildable and shovel ready is one discussion right now, but it's a different discussion to potentially allow a PID to move forward, to get that infrastructure in place, to then have a much potentially different conversation with one of those potential dealerships to say, this is shovel ready. And that may allow that time that it takes to get that infrastructure in place may be the exact amount of time that we need for one of those dealerships to be ready to pull the trigger. And if we're not ready to consider that now, or the developer has to look at other options to do that, I think we need to allow that process to begin again, to get us down a road as quickly as possible to where we ultimately want to be.
Mr. Mayor, if you would allow a discretion, I'd be willing to say no if everybody has any objections, but would anybody have an objection if we ask the applicant on the auto mall to come up and just speak for a minute as to what they would like, what their plans are, what they would hope for? Does this help them? Does this hinder them?
I would be hesitant on that particular item simply because I want to make sure that, because for me, talking about a policy is very much different than talking about a specific item. And yes, we kind of have talked about how there is one that's pending out there that they want to come to us. But in my opinion, we are talking about a policy tonight. We're not talking about a specific request. And so that's
reason I'm
my
asking it-
hesitation.
And I understand, I respect that. The question has been asked if we're willing to consider them. I think it's a relevant question to have somebody make the case why they would want us to consider them. And answers whether or not we should move forward with a policy or shelve it. I mean,
Right? And to me, those are two very different things. We've said we're willing to consider it and have this discussion, but we've moved away from the discussion of, I think, where you want to go, Steve, about what would the policy do, what would it look like, et cetera. Well, let's get a policy in place and then we'll have that discussion.
And I believe that's where I probably would fall right now too, is to say I would much rather, again, based on just the discussion of policy, focus on that, and then again let that conversation be directed again on the consideration and make the grounds of why we should potentially consider it at that point. So
I would have the same concerns. I would not want to have a developer dictate policy, and that's what it would appear to be.
and I completely respect
Yeah.
that.
I think it's a valid request, though. Don't get me wrong.
I think it's germane to our discussion, but I understand
No,
all
for
your
sure.
objections, absolutely.
Sure.
And I don't, I absolutely believe that developer will be part of that process come the time. I just, you know, our body is really dedicated to setting those policies and then allowing people to work within them. I know a lot of people get really upset when they feel like the people that the policy is going to best benefit are the ones shaping the policy entirely, as opposed to the ones that were elected to do it for them. And so, just as a transparency note, and as a you know, making sure that we're doing things as openly and as efficaciously as we can, I think that's best that we avoid that right now. But I do look forward to having those conversations with them once we've moved past this stage.
Got it. Fair enough.
So, any further discussion by the council? I mean, I'm personally one that I think you all are aware that I'm willing. I think this is an appropriate policy for us to approve, because I do think it sets some boundaries and it will keep some things out that we don't want. I'm willing to take a motion if you guys are done with discussion, but I'm also open to continue to discuss it if you guys feel.
I think, at least from my perspective, I've asked a lot of the hard questions. I've tried to ask questions that I've had, as well as I think questions that other people have had. And so I don't know, I think we've kicked that horse enough tonight.
I've stated my position, so.
Okay. With that, then I'll accept a motion on this item.
Mr. Mayor, I will make a motion to approve Resolution R21-2020, adopting and approving a public improvement district policy.
I will second that motion.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Clint?
Yes.
Jared? I will make sure that happens. Steve?
Yes.
Sherry?
No.
And I will vote yes. That motion passes. As has been requested, I'll turn the time over to Councilman Henderson for his comment.
Comment on my vote. My no vote is not no, I don't like this policy, or no, I don't want to look at PIDs. But my no vote is that no, I don't think we should have a policy now. If that makes sense based on previous conversation. So I'm not against the policy. The policy looks good for what it is, but I don't think it's the appropriate time to do so in light of just the one applicant that, for all the reasons mentioned, potentially paid for.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else like to make comment on theirs?
I have a lot of the same concerns. I can see that there's some potentially good uses for a PID, but I think that once we adopt a policy, we won't just have one applicant. So I think that for all the reasons I said previously, my vote was no.
If I might just make a comment too. I share the reservations and concerns that both Sherry and Jared said. I'm worried about the Pandora's box idea. I'm worried about this as the first step down an evil path, you know. But in reality, I think the answers that Chase provided, the explanations he gave legally, I feel give us enough protections going forward that we can move forward with a policy while still kind of, you know, holding the dam against, you know, further problems. So that was my vote for the yes now.
Okay, if there are no further comments regarding the members of the council's vote, we will move on to the next item, which is a discussion and consideration of a resolution approving an interlocal cooperative agreement with Riverton City for microsurfacer seal and stripping. Jonathan. That would be Jonathan, not the empty chair. Given just a second for the presentation to come up.
Maybe while he's pulling that up, I'll give a little bit of background if that's all right. A year ago, about this time, we entered into an interlocal agreement with Riverton City to, so that Herriman City would hire a contractor and then to resurface 134 South and do some striping. And then the agreement is that Riverton City would pay for half of that since the border goes right along 134th. So fast forwarding to today, we made some we made some modifications to what the improvements are. Back a year ago, we decided against doing the original resurfacing was a chip seal. And so we decided to put that on hold and do microsurfacing. And then so there's some additional differences and modifications I can show in my slide, or I can describe it. Either way, I'm good either way. So the original agreement with Riverton City about a year ago for this interlocal agreement was to go, the resurfacing started at Fort Herriman Parkway and went all the way to 5600 West. And again, that was a chip seal. The striping in that original agreement included 5 lanes of travel as well as bike lane on the north side. Now, the agreement is a microsurface seal. We're going to see how well I did by memory here. So now it's a microsurface seal. We're looking at doing so let me go back up to the cost. So it was $60,000 each for each city for a total of $100,000 on the original agreement a year ago. And again, the striping is 5 lanes with bike lanes. Now, the graphic that you're seeing does not represent what it looked like a year ago. Today, the only difference is we're taking the area that we're resurfacing from Fort Herriman Parkway to Mountain View Corridor. So that segment has been added, as well as that teeny little segment on Fort Herriman Parkway. All right, and so the updated ILA includes microsurface seal as opposed to a chip seal. The cost for a micro seal is a little bit more, as well as the footprint that we're taking is a little bit more, so the cost is more. So we take 100,000, they take 100,000. And the striping, as you know, 134th, we are adding capacity to 134th between 5200 West and Mountain View, restriping that to be 7 lanes. And then we will restore striping everything 5200 West and West back to the way it was originally.
How come you eliminated the bike lane?
What's that?
How come there's no bike now?
So that's a good question. So what we're going to do, we're going to step back. The bike lanes can be added to a future project. What we're doing, so obviously the 7 lanes, there's no room for a bike lane. And so if we were to add a bike lane, it would just be an additional stripe plus some messaging for that bike lane. So we're maturing conversations with the department and the traffic committee department. They're maturing some conversations with some lingering concerns with that bike lane. But there's no need for when the bike lane project comes along, there's no need to take out any striping, just adding to that striping. But that can be done at a future project.
But there would be room for a bike lane?
Say that again?
But there would be room for a bike lane?
Yep. From 5200 West and West. There will not be from 5200 West to East. Does that make sense?
Was there originally some grant money that we got for that bike lane?
That funding, yep, there was.
And so how does that affect that grant?
So we're also maturing those conversations as well. The original funding, when granted, the amount of funding that was awarded also had the stipulation of environmental requirements, which was essentially equal to the cost of the funding. And so at that time, we didn't see it was wise to move forward with that funding because it just would have paid for the environmental and with some additional stipulations. So we backed off on that.
Is there sidewalk between 52 and Mountain View on either side?
South side?
I believe there is on the south side, right?
Along the Monarch Meadows apartments there, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
The only area I believe that there's not, Mayor, would be from the CVS on the north side down to Mountain View Corridor.
Correct. Along that same stretch.
Yeah.
Yep.
Jonathan, I have a question because I've not seen the design and update on this. This is good, but so there's no bike lanes from 52 to 56 at all.
That's correct.
So there's going to be on-street parking still.
That's correct.
There will still be on-street parking?
That's correct. Until the future time when we decide to put in additional striping for that bike lane.
Then we're getting rid of the on-street parking at that point?
What's that?
Then there would be no on-street parking at that point?
That's correct.
That would be interesting, because that is utilized heavily.
Has there been any, I guess, I'm sure there has, but
Yes.
consideration of striping that 7 lanes all the way down? Or is there ability to do that?
I jumped too quickly to answer your question. So the answer is, currently the way the analysis shows is that there's no need for additional capacity west of 5200
West
west.
of
5 lanes is all that's needed. Everything west of 5200 west requires the 7 lanes. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
How long would we expect before that extra 2 lanes is required?
We currently do not anticipate it with the current master plan.
Okay.
And I did put into this slide the plans for the striping, which is mainly the reason I wanted to jump up here and kind of talk for the council's discussion. There's no in particular spot where we wanted to jump in and show anything here, other than showing how 7 lanes looks from 5200 west to Mountain View Corridor. At the top of the screen, that's 5200 west. You can see there, probably the best view is probably the bottom one here. We can see how that middle lane will vary depending on the section. And let me jump to this next one here as well. So further on the top of the screen, you can see as you're moving east, that center lane widens out, but we also maintain the 3 lanes on each side. And then you're approaching Mountain View Corridor on that bottom screen. So 7 lanes, again, from Mountain View Corridor all the way to 5200 west, and then we are putting back the existing from 5200 west to 5600 west.
What would it take to get a bike lanes on from 52 up to 56, or at least from Mountain View or Fort Herriman on up? Because we have a lot of cyclists that come around that loop, and we've been talking about this for a couple of years, putting that bike lane in, and then all of a sudden the decision is made not to put it in. I'm actually disappointed.
So from the section, that's a good question. So from Mountain View Corridor to 5200 west, for a shared lane was what would be required. So messaging inside the lane would be required there. And that's just that stick figure picture of a bike and a person on there at the very least for that portion. And then everything west of 5200 west would require an additional stripe plus the messaging in addition to that fog line.
So it's about extra striping.
So what we're trying to do is, again, mature the conversations we have with their lingering concerns with those residents along there as they're using that parking extensively. We're maturing those conversations, trying to close out those concerns. We may not resolve those, as well as also, although the first time with funding it didn't work out, we're also taking a look at that funding as well.
I'm a little concerned because the council has gotten complaints about the parking on the street there and the problem it's created, and now we've moved away from that. And without any dialogue here, we're approving interlocal, which I agree with needs to be done. But I would like to figure out, with all the complaints we've had about that on-street parking and the lack of bike lanes that we have throughout the city, and an opportunity to do it right, we just didn't get it done.
And those are some good points, Brett. Something I would point out is that regardless of this interlocal, that additional striping could be made as part of this project. If that's the direction that's required, we could certainly do that. Again, the striping we're doing currently now isn't something that would lock us into any particular decision, and we could add some striping now or even in the future with minimal effort, well, incidental effort.
If we're going to make changes and extend lanes, and I think that would be the time to do it, is because people will all be looking and expecting change if we've added lanes. I would prefer to see if we could put something together now to maybe put in those bike lanes and get that taken care of now, so that we address those issues now. I would hate to make a change and then make another change and then make another change. I'd rather do it all at once if possible, is my 2 cents. That's how I feel about that. But as far as the project itself goes, I'm sure our residents are going to be very happy to extend, or have more drive lanes.
How does that striping transition, this goes up to Mountain View corridor, obviously, so how does it carry through that Mountain View corridor interchange and then continue on to 134th? Is it, because once you get on top of that piece in between the two Mountain View corridor, north and south lanes, there's only 2 straight-through lanes there. Is this going to change that to 3 straight-through lanes so you have that contiguous on both sides of the Mountain View interchange there?
That's a good question, Clint. And I had failed to go to that last slide, and it's there on your screen right now. You can see there's a right and a through, which would carry through, so you would have 3 straight throughs at that segment that you're speaking of.
3 straight through?
That's correct.
Plus, there's still, if I remember correctly, there's still enough width as you're approaching Mountain View heading eastbound for that southbound right-hand turn lane as well, correct?
Correct.
So you'll have the 2 turn lanes for northbound, 3 straight through, and 1 turn lane for southbound when this striping is completed. Is that correct?
It sounds right.
Okay. To the,
Please.
so they would tie into the Mountain View area once we complete that road connection there at 132 then?
Yeah.
Okay. To the issue of the on-street parking up in the area and the need for bike lanes up there, certainly Blake's comments there make sense of turning that and tying that in at the 132, but west of 5200 West, I know that's something that we've talked about for a long time, and realizing that obviously that would be a separate cost on our piece of the street, not knowing what Riverton wants to do on their side. Obviously, I'm fine with the interlocal as it is, that clearly outlines the scope of the project and the money involved by both of them. However, I would still like to look at the bike lane heading west of 5200 West.
You bet. Great.
Yeah, because that won't require interlocal with us because it's just on our north side, right?
Sorry, Sherry, what's that?
Because that won't require interlocal because that's just the north side that we're proposing to.
That's correct.
That'd just be
Yeah.
already.
Yeah, additional cost to the city. Right.
And it's really just striping, so it's not terrible.
At nominal cost.
Yeah. Jared, do you have any comments on this one? Yes.
I don't have a problem with that.
Was that a motion? Steve?
No, I think the bike lane is an issue that we need to have discussion on.
Probably need your mic down.
Bike lane's something we need to have further discussion on, but I don't know that should hold up the interlocal for the rest of it.
No, I agree.
So I think the direction you have from us is please bring back the bike lanes and plan for that.
Sounds good.
And then
I'm definitely excited about the increased flow.
That's fantastic.
Past 5200 West. I think it's desperately needed. However, again, hopefully traffic flows will stay down as Steve talked about tonight, because I can tell you my commute has been much better the past couple of months.
well, it sounds like we're ready to make a motion on this particular item.
I'll make a motion to approve Resolution R22-2020, adopting and approving an interlocal agreement between Riverton City and Herriman City for a surfacer seal and striping.
I will second.
Motion and a second. Jared? Steve?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
Clint?
Yes.
I'll vote yes, that motion passes. That brings us to the end of our general meeting. Our next planning commission meeting will be on June 4th at 7 p.m. Our next city council work meeting will begin at 5 PM on June 10th, and the city council meeting will be at 7:30 PM that night as well. And then we just want to extend a congratulations to our graduating seniors as they are approaching their end of their unusual senior year. We look forward to seeing what they can become out in our community. So we're grateful for them and look forward to seeing them be successful. With that, I will accept a motion to go into a closed session where we will end our broadcast and invite the public to leave before we go discuss closed items.
Make a motion to temporarily recess the city council meeting to convene in closed session for the purpose to discuss pending or reasonable imminent litigation and the purchase, exchange, or lease of real property as provided by Utah Code annotated section 52-4-205.
I will second.
I have a motion and a second. Steve?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
Clint?
Yes.
Jared? And I'll vote yes, that motion passes. We thank the public for their participation. We will be suspending our broadcast. And any members of the public that are here, we will invite to leave us at this time. When we come back, we will have to close the meeting, but we will take no action, so there will be no further broadcast. Thank you.